Hi everyone, it's Deb. How are you? Welcome back to my second in the series of jewelry tutorials. Not really a tutorial. This is more back to basics, and this one is about wire and a little bit about jump rings and things. So let's start with wire. I want to talk about gauges, like types of wire and gauges. First of all, wire comes in all different materials such as copper, brass, your precious sterling silver, argentium silver, which is instead of being 92.5% silver, it's 93.5% silver. Doesn't tarnish as easily as sterling. I love argentium silver, but anyway, you have gold, like 14 karat, whatever, 18 karat, very expensive. You have gold filled, you have silver filled, which basically is a plated, except that it's a much thicker plating than regular plated materials. You have your plated wires, silver plated wires, gold plated wires, usually plated over brass or over copper. And then you have memory wire, which I'm not going to get into a lot today. We'll do a whole separate thing on memory wire and maybe making a project. So those are some of the, and also aluminum wire, which is, we'll get into that in a minute too. And then you have different shapes of wire, the most popular being round. You can see a picture here of round. It also comes half round, which is more for wire wrapping, to wrap around square or round wire. And yes, there is square wire. And then there's also twisted round and twisted square, and there's, I mean, you can get just about everything. So most of us will be working in non-precious metal, silver coated or silver plated wire, okay? But some of us occasionally like to use colored wires, and that's available too. So for me, my most used wires, what did I just do with that one, is 20 gauge when I'm not working in precious metal. It's 20 gauge, and usually an artistic wire, or this is actually Parawire. eebeads.com is no longer in business. They sold. But this is a silver plated copper wire, and if you look really close, you'll be able to see a little pink on the end, which is the copper underneath. I have my light turned down. I'm going to actually turn it up just a notch to get rid of some of the shadow, but I have it down so you don't get glared out the wazoo from the sparkle. So this is a 20 gauge silver plated wire, and it's the Parawire and the artistic wire are generally what they call dead soft, or it's a very soft malleable wire. You can bend it easily like this. You can make loops with it easily. Then you have something normally called half hard. In the precious metals they would call it half hard. Beadalon, and I don't know if anybody else does, but Beadalon makes this what they call German style wire, and it says medium temper. And there's a little chart on the back of those usually that says dead soft up to full hard. Half hard is here, and medium temper German style copper is not quite as hard as half hard, but it's right up close to there. So it's definitely harder than artistic wire. It even says artistic wire is dead soft. German style copper, which is this, medium temper is about here, and then sterling silver is right here, and then half hard, they tell you the different types. And non-tarnished brass is harder than half hard, and then you get all the way up to like stainless steel and full hard, which means it is really hard and can be brittle. I don't ever work with full hard. I figure if I want to harden it, I can hammer it and work with it by making coils and things, and it will harden by itself. So I either work with dead soft, or for things like ear wires and whatnot, I like to use half hard or medium temper, which is this one. So this is the same gauge, the same thickness, if you will, but it's harder wire. It still bends, it's still pretty pliable because it's not a real thick one, but it'll hold its shape better. It doesn't get bent out of shape as easily as like this one, which I should have my nylon jaw pliers here for. So 20 gauge is the one I prefer. Now sometimes if I need it to hold its shape more, I go up a gauge to 18 gauge. So this one here, I'm going to try and show you the difference. This one here is 18 gauge, so it is thicker. The smaller the number, the thicker the wire. So let me get that out of the way and see if I can show you the difference. So this is 18 gauge and this is 20. Can you see that the 18 gauge is thicker? So then if I wanted to go up even further, let's bring in an aluminum, because I don't really have well, I probably do, but in precious metal. This is 12 gauge. So here we have 18. This is 12. This is 20. So you can see that you get thicker. Now, aluminum is probably the softest wire ever. Comes in a whole variety of colors. But the problem with it being so soft is sometimes it doesn't hold its shape. Even after you've put it into a shape, and you do have to work hard on it, but it also, the colors on it can mar easier or come off easier than some of the other wires. It's not true across the board. Now aluminum does come in 18 gauge as well. Here's a purple one, 18 gauge, so it's the same thickness as this. It's even softer than this soft copper wire, okay? So it's like dead soft. But you can get it in so many colors and things. It's, yeah, that's the nice thing about aluminum wire. I tend not to use it very much. Once in a while I do. Well, I haven't used much of anything lately, but anyway. Okay, you can get plated wire in, it's not really plated, it's colored in different colors too. This was from a British company, jewelry maker. Fuchsia colored copper wire. Now this is 18 gauge too, so it's not aluminum, it's a colored copper. They have their gauges run different. Ours are what's called American wire gauge, and if you really want to read up on wire, I would suggest going to Fire Mountain Gems. They have a resource center, and just do a search on jewelry making wire article. And here you'll find all about jewelry making wire. They have so many good resources there, and I'm not sponsored by them, but I've just bought from them for, you know, a number of years. They talk about dead soft, full hard, half hard. They talk about the types of wire, softest to hardest, dead soft, half hard, full hard, what their wires in their store run, and then also how to work hardened wire, the different shapes of wire, like half round, square. Yes, it comes in square too. Like here's a 22 gauge, which is smaller than 20. Square, I don't use that very often, but it's medium temper. That again, that's more for wire wrapping type things. If you're going to make a wrapped cabochon or a bracelet and wrap wire around other wire. So they have round, half round, excuse me, square, and there's also flat wire, which has its benefits. Half round's also nice for rings, because if you're wire wrapping rings, or most ring bands like this, for example, is probably starting with a half round wire, so it's flat against your skin and rounded on the back. And yeah, anyway, so this article then has a wire gauge size chart, and I brought it out because sometimes it's hard to see with the reflective material. So I thought maybe you could see, like here's 12 gauge like I showed you with the aluminum, 14, 16, 18, and here's 20, 22, 20 and 22 are pretty good for ear wires. I actually like a 19 gauge argentium silver for ear wires personally, and I like it in half hard for ear wires. But a lot of people, if you're just starting out, 20 gauge is a good one, or if you have small holes in your ears, 22 gauge, but I find them to be a little too bendy. And then these over here, I wouldn't use for much of anything other than wrapping around other thicker wire. 24, 26, well, 24 gauge maybe. If you needed a thin wire to go through a gemstone, perhaps. Yeah, and I'll show you some things in a minute about that. So 24, 26, 28, 30, and you notice they're getting like almost like thread in these levels here. Let's see if I have a 30 gauge here. I don't, but I have a 26. This is 26 gauge, and it's really thin and fine. I accidentally once had bought 30 gauge, and oh my gosh, it's so skinny. Now let me show you that compared to 20. So here's 20 gauge. Here's 26 gauge, if you can see the difference. Very fine 26 gauge, and really this is plated copper, very soft. So this is good for wrapping around the other wire. You know, wire wrapped cabochons, wire wrapped bracelets, wire wrapped rings, whatever. So my go-to is 20 gauge, except for my higher end ear wires. I usually use argentium 19 gauge, half hard, and I can only find that at Rio Grande online. Okay, so this article is also good because one of the things I wanted to tell you is, oh, and they give you recommendations on which gauges to use for wire wrapping. So I would say probably 14, 16, 18, and 20 are what you would wrap around, and 22, 24, and 26 you would use for wrapping around. But your jump rings also come in these gauges, and that becomes important because you might have the same diameter of a jump ring, like this would be a 6 millimeter, but if it's a 18 gauge, it's going to be a lot thicker. This is a split ring actually, but it would be a lot thicker around than a 20 gauge, than a 24 gauge. And honestly, most places don't even tell you what gauge the jump rings are. This is another reason I prefer buying my jump rings from reputable places like Fire Mountain, because it tells me the gauge. So for example, these are 4 millimeter, which are teeny weeny little jump rings, and they are made out of 20 gauge wire. Okay, so I know they're a little thinner than some. Now I don't know that I have any 4 millimeter thicker than that, but I do have, I didn't get them out. Let me pause for a minute and get this wire out of the way, and I'll come back. All right, so let's talk about jump rings. All right, so the way you usually buy jump rings, it tells you the diameter, meaning this way. This way. You can see we have teeny weeny. These are 4 millimeter. These are all silver plated. Most are silver plated copper, except these. These are silver plated brass, and I'm not sure about these. Okay, this is a 5 millimeter. You can see it's a little bit bigger in diameter. This is a 6 millimeter. This is a 7 millimeter. And then this is a 10 millimeter. I usually don't go for the bigger ones unless it's a design element. And I don't believe that these are silver plated either, but I cannot remember. I'm not sure. They're just some kind of base metal. And these were from Beadbox Bargains. These were from jewelrymaker.com. And they're silver plated copper. These were from Fire Mountain. Now these little ones, Fire Mountain tells you when you get them or look on their website, it's silver plated brass, SLPBR, round, 4mm, 20 gauge. So 20 gauge is not the diameter, it is the thickness of the wire they use to make the jump ring, which I know that's really hard to see. I think most of these ones from Jewelry Maker, although they don't say, I think they're done in 18 gauge. So here's 20 gauge. You can see not the size of the jump ring, but the diameter of the wire. Oh, so shiny, and I don't know if you can, let me turn this light off because it is daylight here. Now that's better. You can sort of see. It's still a little blurry, but can you see how thick the wire is compared to this? So this is 20 gauge. This, I believe, is 18, which in over in the UK would be a 1mm wide wire. They don't do theirs by gauge, they do it by millimeter. So 20 gauge, you know, if I was looking at this chart again, let's just, I don't know them all by heart, but 18 gauge is 1mm. 20 gauge is 0.8 millimeter. They don't have a 24 gauge. 26 is 0.4 millimeter. And 22, I think, is 0.6 millimeter. And then I'm not sure what the other ones down here are. So these four most popular: 0.4, 0.6 is 22 gauge, 0.8 is 20 gauge, and 1mm is 18. So then it goes like 1.2, 1.4, whatever, one up. So theirs would be 1mm wide, but 5mm, 6mm, 7mm, and then this was not by them. That's 10mm. Now, a lot of people like using, well, let me just step back a minute. This one I got from Auntie's Beads, and it was sold to me as 6mm 19 gauge. So if I hold this up to the 6mm, oops, this is 5, 4, 5, 6. If I put this next to this one, this clearly is not 6mm. It's probably 7mm. The gauge may be right, 19 gauge, but because it is a little bit thinner than this one from jewelrymaker.com. But look at the size, and I did test these. This is a 6mm. This one is more like a 7. So get your rings from a reputable place and know what you're getting. And if you are going to be doing chain mail, you have to go somewhere that gives you inner diameter, outer diameter, and whatnot to make sure your rings are going to fit together properly, because they don't always if they're too thick or too thin or whatever. So if you're going to be into chain mail, like making Byzantine weave or all the different kinds of weaves, Byzantine's my favorite and the easiest. You need to get rings. These, to me, I call these my jewelry making closure jump rings. These are just for attaching things and closing things, mostly attaching things. They're not for doing chainmail, okay? You need to just, I have a whole separate little bin full of chainmail jump rings, and I'm not real big into that, but I have made a few Byzantine bracelets, and my daughter has worn one for a while, although I haven't seen her wear it lately. Anyway, so, you know, I'm just trying to give you a starting point. Oh, and there's also oval jump rings, which are really good for doing necklace closures. I forget about them sometimes, but they're good because they will not pull open as easily as the round where it's important on like necklace closures. This is an 8x6, so it's 8 long, 6 wide. This is from Fire Mountain, and I think it's 18 gauge, so thickness of 18 gauge, which is a nice sturdy wire. And those are great for doing, like I said, attaching your clasp at the end of your necklace, because they won't pull apart as easily as these other open jump rings. And then of course you have your split rings, different sizes, like this is a 6mm, this is probably an 8, 7 or 8, I think 8, and different colors, and that's just basically jump rings but coiled around an extra time and a half or so. And they're a little more secure too, although I actually have had things come apart with those, believe it or not. And then also you can get shaped jump rings, like these are stars for special occasions, and these are little squares or diamonds, depending on how you look at it. They call them square, bright silver, 7mm, and they're open, so you can twist them open just like a regular jump ring, but they're square if you want that in your design element. And then the other thing is let's get off jump rings for a minute and let's talk. Let me put these in their bags or I'll lose them if I don't. And we'll talk about head pins, which is basically wire. So I hope this is helpful and I'm not being too going too quick with this and things. I just you know, there's such a wide audience. I'm never sure who knows what and who doesn't know what, but if you don't need to see this, then you can not watch it, you know. And if you need more information, let me know, but I'm trying to give you some resources, and I don't mean to keep pushing Fire Mountain, but they seem to be the place in the US that has the most resource information available. So anyway, this is a nice chart. It tells you things for like making head pins. Good gauges to use are 20, 21, which is mostly what you'll find, 22 and 24. Here in the States, you mostly find 21 and 24. I like making them also out of 20, and sometimes 18 if the hole in the bead is too thick or too wide. Ear wires, they suggest 20, 21, and 22. I personally find 22 to be too thin for an ear wire. It's too bendy and it can get out of shape easier. But I like 19. 18 is a little too thick, 19 is good, and 20 is good. They're my preferred. 21 would be all right also if you can find it. So let's talk about these jump rings, head pins. Here again, Fire Mountain tells you, like, this is 2-inch long, 21 gauge. That's mostly going to be your standard if you're buying online jump rings. In the stores, you'll mostly see what the inches are, and they won't tell you the thickness. So these are 21 gauge. They're pretty good for most of your jewelry making. They have a flat head on the end. You can also get them with little balls on the end. These are silver plated brass, and eventually the silver plating will wear off eventually. They do last a good long while, but if you're out in humidity and salt air and things, yeah, it'll wear off a lot sooner. And even me, I used to do craft fairs outside, and every now and then I have to redo a pair of earrings and things because the coloring wore off. I should have left them out. These are also 2-inch, but these are 24 gauge, which in other countries would probably be called featherweight. I've seen them called featherweight anyway. And let me get these other ones back out. The 21 gauge, so I can hopefully show you the difference in the thickness. So if your bead has a really small hole, you might want the 24 gauge or a 22 gauge even. Okay, so this is the 21 gauge, this is the 24 gauge. Can you see the difference in the thickness? I hope. This is a lot thicker than this one. This is a pretty standard size. I like 2-inch. You can get them in 1-inch. You can get them in 3-inch. You can get them in 2.5-inch. You can get them in 1.5-inch. I actually, for most of the work I do, if I'm going to use a head pin, I mostly get 2-inch, and I don't mind cutting off a little bit. I don't like getting the smaller 1-inch ones. I have some, and they're all right if you're just going to put a couple little beads on the end and turn a loop. But if you're going to do any kind of wire wrapping, you need some wire left on the end to do that wrapping. Oops, you get down there. So anyway, basically what a head pin is a piece of wire, like we talked about earlier, hammered flat on the one, like soldered and hammered flat on the one end. Okay, that's what a head pin is. So you can make your own head pins. You can make fancy shape head pins. You don't have to use those flat ends. Now, unless you're going to use a torch, you probably aren't going to make the ball ends. These are also flat. But that's another thing about these. The thinner they are, the tinier the little head is on it too. And many times, except for maybe pearls or some tiny gemstones, many times this little flat head will go right through the hole of the bead. So then you need something like a bead cap or something to help keep it from going through the bead. So it's sometimes just easier to make your own head pin, and we'll do that in a video, but not today. So those are head pins. Like I said, you can get them in different lengths. You can get them in different widths. But these are the two I go for. The 24 gauge, which is the fine one, and normally 2-inch, and the 21 gauge. If I make my own, a lot of times I make them out of the 20 gauge. So those are head pins, and of course they come in silver plated, sterling silver, silver filled, you know, gold, gold tone, which is not plated. It's basically just a real thin layer. Gold plated, which is a little bit thicker. Gold filled, which of course is thicker gold yet. You can get them in antique bronze color, which I love. I love the antique bronze. You can just get them in plain copper. Now copper, raw copper will tarnish quickly. I can't wear raw copper next to my skin. It turns me green, and I've tried spraying it with coatings and stuff, and it still turns me green. I have a beautiful bracelet I made in a class at a bead fest, and I can't wear it because it turns me green. And it was sprayed even by the instructor there with several coats of sealer. So anyway, that's it for today's lesson. I hope that helped. Now this, obviously, last time I think I showed you the difference, just quickly, the difference between wire and beading wire and other stringing material. I didn't get into beading wire at all. This is just wire for wire wrapping, making your loops, attaching things to chain. You use the jump rings and things. So that's what this is now, and making ear wires and head pins. If you're going to be doing stringing and using beading wire, that's a different kind of wire, and we'll do that in a separate thing. So that's all for now. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked that. And like I said, go out, look around on Fire Mountain Gems and Beads website. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I used to just order a lot from them, and I've slowed down considerably. But they have a wealth of articles out there that you can look at their resource center for free and search on whatever you want to know. This one is called All About Jewelry Making Wire. So, and you can read that. If anything wasn't clear from me, maybe this would help you. Or you can also get, you know, like a beginner book. Hang on. And, you know, this was my very first jewelry making book that my daughter had gifted me. There's information even in here on bead sizes, and I think there's a section on wire also. Tools, let's see, memory wire. I don't know if they get into, they have to, yeah, jump rings and split rings, head pins and eye pins. Oh, I didn't talk about eye pins. Eye pins are wire with a loop on the end, a lollipop loop. I rarely buy them because I make my own. I do have a couple left from years gone by, but I don't usually buy them. Huh, I don't see anything in here that's unusual about wire gauge and stuff. I guess they figured you didn't need to know that if you're a beginner, but I feel it's important because I wish I had known. So anyway, all right, that's all, guys. I will talk to you soon. Hugs, love, and peace. Have a great week, and let me know if you want to know something specifically, and I'll try and work it into another video. Bye for now.